Another exhibit case over on this side is another skill that, for the most part, has kind of died away, and that being the shoemaking. You know, we think about all the cobbler equipment. We see these things around, especially with the last, and you know, there's still a lot of those things around in homes here and there that may take up room on a shelf because they're people consider them quaint or something. I don't know, but that was another skill that, in all likelihood, if there was a family of the grown-ups and 10 children on a farm, somebody in that family had cobbler skills sooner or later, and they could make their own shoes or repair their own shoes. One of the fascinating things to me in this museum, we have a photograph that was done by Margaret Morley in the late 1800s, early 1900s in this area. That it's a school group standing out in front of the old one-room schoolhouse, and I think one person in that whole crowd has shoes on. So that was a precious commodity that they went without in the summertime. And if the weather was warm enough at all to be without shoes, then they were, because they had to have those shoes to help survive the winters. And if they outgrew them, then they went down to another sibling. So, you know, they made the most of the things that they had. One of the primary differences to me in the lifestyle between now and then is we provide labor for ourselves or for an employer, and we have financial gain from that. So when we have that money, then we can go to a store and buy things that somebody else's labor made. And that's the biggest difference in the lifestyle to me, is that it was a simpler lifestyle during this time period when people were living in cabins, and a lot of them were farmers, and then later a subsistence farmer where they worked a public job and farmed. But during that lifespan right there, that era rather, all these people were skilled people. If they couldn't grow it or make it, then that's when they had to go to the store. And we've heard stories about all this, that the primary things that people would go to a mercantile for was sugar and coffee and some of the things like that they couldn't produce. But if they didn't have the money to buy sugar, then someone in the neighborhood could create molasses. They also had honey, they had bees, and so they had a lot of skills, and they had focus. And if they didn't do the work, then it didn't get done. And if they didn't do the work, then they didn't survive. It was that simple. Now they were at the mercy of nature. They were at the mercy of the weather. If someone depended on a large corn crop because they needed the silage for their animals and they needed the corn for themselves, then if a bad storm came through, a hailstorm came through in late summer, early fall, and destroyed the corn, then they were up against hard times that winter, for sure. Hopefully they would have a neighbor close by within a couple of miles that might be able to help them out. But that's kind of, to me, that's the biggest difference in our lifestyles. Not that we don't work now. There's still a lot of people that are involved in hard manual labor, and they get paid for it. They get financial gain, and they go buy their goods. But it's just a different lifestyle. Now, we had talked earlier about some of the things that people maintained at their home, and how they gained their food and other things they needed. And this bee gum is a fine example of how they maintained their own foodstuffs around the home. They grew the gardens, and they had the animals for food, and they fished in the streams and hunted in the woods and that kind of stuff to get their food. But around pretty much every home place was several stands of bees. And we kind of wonder sometimes why we call them bee gums, and this is a fine example right here where this beehive or stand is made of a gum tree. So a lot of times they were hollowed out, and they were hollow anyway, some of them, and so they could use the gum that way, and it would last a long time. And it was a good use for gum because there are not a lot of other uses for it. Unfortunately, it was hard to cut for wood to heat the home. But the way this bee gum is made, and I think you can see from the video that it's hollow, and down on the bottom are some notches cut in this area right here, and that's where the bees would go in. Now, if this looks strange to you on the video, we have a mirror down below it so that you can walk up beside it and see what's underneath. And one of the most beneficial things, other than the honey that came out of this, because they could use it for sweetening, and honey does not spoil. It's one of the few things that you can keep on and on. You don't have to worry about preserving it. And the bees played a primary role in pollination of the garden. So they would have them around close by somewhere so that those bees could pollinate maybe their vegetable garden. Most homes had an orchard, or at least had some fruit trees in the area. So they played a key role. In this section of the museum, we depict another part of the frontier lifestyle and some of the aspects of the mountain heritage, I guess. It's not strictly for the mountains. Also, it's all over. It is known that traditionally, one of the crops from the farm, the corn crop, supplied cornmeal for the family, silage for the animals, the work animals, and also one of the aspects that we look at on occasion is that if a family grew more corn than what they needed, then it was hard to get enough of it in a wagon to haul it away from home, to haul it to a market somewhere and sell it and actually make money on the corn. However, if they could alter that corn, then they could put enough of it in a wagon to make quite a bit of money. And the way they altered that corn is by using steel like this. And they made their moonshine, and that's we have colloquialisms that sometimes the local people, I guess, like us, kind of perk up and notice. And one of them to me is that I never heard it called moonshine, hardly until I was grown. I heard that term and I knew what it was, but it was liquor. That's all it was corn liquor, and that's what people talked about. And so when nobody said I'm making moonshine, they said I've got a liquor still now. And so, but this is one that we've had here in the museum for quite a while, and we tried to set it up in a fairly close fashion the way it would have been used. And I won't go into the whole process, but it's roughly you could, once you get mash, which is corn that's sprouted, and then you let it ferment a while, and then you put it in here and you heat it, and alcohol vaporizes at 140 degrees, and we know that water vaporizes at 220, boils and vaporizes at 220. So they had to maintain the temperature in this mechanism between those two temperatures, between 140 and 220, because the alcohol would vaporize and come across through this pipe, and it comes down in this copper spout into this barrel right here. And there's a copper coil that's difficult to see down in this barrel, but it's copper pipe about an inch in diameter, and it coils down to the bottom and then comes out this spout. And the way it works is the alcohol vaporizes out of the mash and comes over and comes back into this cooler water that's running in here into this barrel, and that makes it liquefy again, and then the alcohol comes out the spout down here. So it's not something that an unskilled person could do. They actually had to learn this, and it was a long, drawn-out process to perfect it. Now, they could do it, but they might blow the top off this thing too. And they had to be careful about doing those things, and they could get hurt easily. And so we've tried to depict that, and Primarily the reason that it was illegal. For periods in American history, it's been legal to have a distillery. It's been legal to make your own or make enough to sell to make some money. But it's the taxation that was the issue. Primarily after the Civil War during the Reconstruction period, when taxation became heavier on alcoholic beverages, then that's when there became a problem, and that's when they started working at night and making moonshine, and that's the reason it got its name that way. And we have some things here in the museum that have been used locally, and this particular still right here was a gift from Jim Ed Wheeler, and he was nice enough to let us have this thing and use it, and it's been in here for several years. And we always joke with museum visitors about the guardian of the still, and you can see the guardian on the floor back there, just behind the still, and that's a local snake that's lived with us for quite a while too. But we always claim him to be the guardian, so nobody will break it up. But we try to show the process, and we have some things here on the exhibit panels that depict the process, describe it, talk about some of the terms, the vocabulary, terminology with making corn whiskey. And actually, there was a distillery in Marion back late 1800s, early 1900s, and we happen to have a bottle here in this exhibit area that was from that distillery, and that was in the Cross Mill section of Marion, and it's right here in this vitrine. And the history of that can be found in several books that have been published here in this area. There has been an industry in the mountains for several decades based on the digging of roots and herbs and other plants that could be used for medicine or that can be used for beverages like sassafras and some other things. It's not as common as it once was, especially early 1900s, maybe late 1800s, up through the Depression era, that the local people would dig and sell these plants, and so they managed to supplement their income that way. They a lot of times needed that cash money. They could grow their own food and create their own shelter, but they needed cash for a few other things that they couldn't create or find. And one of the companies that came out of that era was the S.B. Pinnock Company. And here on this panel we have some boxes from the S.B. Pinnock Company. And that Mr. Pinnock came to Marion here in McDowell County and started buying these roots and herbs and other plants from the locals who were digging them in the mountains, and it kind of grew. And he relocated to Asheville, North Carolina, after his business grew larger, and subsequently grew even larger and moved to New York. And it's still he was involved in the pharmaceutical business, and as I mentioned earlier, the basis for a lot of those pharmaceuticals can be found in these plants. And one of the primary plants is depicted right here. This photograph shows ginseng. Now, people still dig ginseng root and sell it, and that root has, when in a dried state, has sold for as much as $500 a pound, maybe a little higher. The market fluctuates, but most of the ginseng, from what I understand, goes to the Asian markets, and eventually comes back to the United States in a different form. And and just below to the right of that photograph is is a plant, and this is kind of what it looks like in September. Most of the people who start to look for it, there is a season on it now, they start to look for these yellow leaves in September.